Excellent. So welcome to the TPG Leadership Series, a series where we look at what it takes to assess and interview a CEO candidate. What are the core skills that we're looking at? We're looking at a framework, a universal framework of 6 universal skill sets, which are vision, strategy, leadership, management, revenue generation, and financial literacy. Today, we're talking about financial literacy and the most basic of them, which is, can your CEO manage the P&L? To help me out, I've got some great co-hosts with me today. And one of our co-hosts has been bred in Silicon Valley, is representing the digital community, and it's a real area that's extremely important to most of our clients today. Is the digital disruption and digital transformations which are taking place. And here's a man who actually did a Silicon Valley startup, has done .com startups in the belly of the digital beast, if you will, has also worked for massive successful digital companies such as Sun Microsystems and others, before joining Bank of America, where he was vice president of IT, looking after digital transformation for several of their divisions. After that, he came to Jordan, where he joined the Bank of Jordan as the chief information officer. And then, seeing the boom in the digital market, he has started his own consultancy, where he just has not been able to fulfill the demand for his services, flying internationally, headquartered in Vegas. Currently, the man's in Jordan. He is the CEO and founder of Digital Analytica, one of the region's premier consultancies for digital transformation. Please welcome Mr. Nasser Zega, sorry.
Thank you,
Zega.
Thank you. I mean, basically, you always introduce me first. I hope you'll introduce yourself as well. You know, you're very much renowned, I guess, in the industry of human resources and their management and so forth. I don't want to just say anything more about Chain Phillips. You know, everyone knows Chain Phillips, and that's why we're here for this show. We're for Chain Phillips, and of course, Peter Baker as well. You know, so go ahead, Chain. Continue, please. Thanks for the introduction.
Thank you so much, Nasser. And yeah, our second co-host is hailing from the big island of Australia, a man who from an early age wanted an international career, and it's a vision he has fulfilled. Working for Procter & Gamble, he was a divisional head for prestige care and fragrances across Asia. It's a massive portfolio that included China and many other Asian geographies. And then he moved on to become one of 3 global CHROs for Maersk Shipping, where he oversaw over 100 countries. And then he joined First Abu Dhabi Bank, one of the largest banks in the Middle East, where he was Group Chief Human Resource Officer. And now his humanitarian heartstrings have been pulled, and he has become the global head of HR for Plastic Bank. And maybe Peter can tell us a little bit more about what Plastic Bank does. So I think I got your title wrong, Peter. You're not a global head of HR. You have a sexier title, right?
We are fancy people and culture in Plastic Bank, but that is great. It's great to be here. I find these meetings super interesting as we dialogue about important topics. Yeah, I'm currently working with Plastic Bank. We are addressing the problem of ocean plastic by empowering local communities to collect plastic before it goes into the ocean, and then assisting them with the recycling process. So it's a wonderful mission and great to be part of. But I'm also always interested in these type of topics, which is why I'm delighted to come back week after week to hear from Shane and to be part of the dialogue. So thanks everyone for joining.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. And we're lucky to have some very experienced co-hosts with us. And of course, our audience actually has some very experienced people in it as well. And I've had a couple chairmen of companies actually register for the event. So it is quite a senior audience. So hopefully to our audience, this is participative. So if you want to join in, you want to turn on your video, you want to ask us a question, or perhaps you disagree with something we're presenting, all comments are welcome, both positive and negative. So please don't hold back. So today, we're looking at, can your CEO manage a P&L? So you got the bulls and the bears here, and I think that's really the key. Anyone can be good on a good day, but can you be good when that bear comes out of hibernation and comes looking out for your bottom line? And so this is what we're really going to be talking about today, is looking at the framework that we use for assessing the financial literacy of your chief executive officer, and what does that look like. And then we'll also look at some core case studies, real life case studies, where we've really dealt with situations where the CEO maybe hasn't had the financial skills that were required to be successful in various market conditions. We'll look at what are the key questions that you can ask to quickly ascertain what the financial capability is. And then we'll look at what does it mean with some of the reports that your CEO is receiving. What does that tell you about your CEO just by looking at what kind of reporting they're actually receiving? So just to give you a quick overview of the framework that we're using, it's a three-pronged step. And some people have said, hey, this topic that we're talking about today is a little bit too casual. And it's because there's three areas. Number one, when we're assessing the CEO, the first step is we want to see, can they read the P&L? Can they really interact effectively with the chief financial officer? Do you have the bare minimum amount of financial literacy to actually get the best performance out of your finance team? The second piece then is, can they optimize your organic growth rate? So this is really about, reducing your working capital, unlocking value in the balance sheet, and other things that they can do to really accelerate the growth without going into the more inorganic growth strategies. And then the third piece, where most companies don't actually need a CEO which this dramatic financial skill set, but this is really kind of the realm of the investment banker. This is if you want to IPO the business. This is someone like someone who is really utilizing the capital markets to drive their growth speed, like Sir Martin Sorrell, for example, who created the world's largest advertising firm. His financial skill set as a CEO would really be in the third box. So today we're just looking at box number one. Obviously, we don't have enough time to cover the complex and sophisticated approach that you would need for all three boxes. But if you stay tuned, every week we're going to be going through this. So next Wednesday we'll be also looking at the other areas. The inorganic growth strategy is next week, so we'll be looking at that. So just want to touch on before I get into this, and maybe Peter, you can either agree or disagree with me here, but what you want to have some lodestars as you head into these senior executive assessments. And often you see people gravitate to technical skills and they end up losing a senior candidate 8 months or 12 months into the role. So you're going to hire on technical ability and fire on culture, as the saying goes. So what are the most three important elements that we really want to keep in front of us where we're doing this assessment? And number one is really the identity of the candidate. And so you can see, my co-host here, Peter, has made a very strong identity statement by becoming, the head of people and culture, at Plastic Bank, which has a nice humanitarian feel to it. So who are you? How do you define yourself? How do you think about yourself? This is really what we want to understand when you're assessing a senior person. And then the next part is we want to understand where they're going in life. The funniest thing is that a lot of the CEOs I deal with actually don't want to be CEOs. And you really have to question yourself, what is the board doing, or what is the leadership team doing when you're putting someone in the top job who actually doesn't want that role? So you really want to hang a lot of your assessment on this exact element right here. And so, for example, you can go online and you can go on LinkedIn, and some of the CEOs have their CVs actually attached to their LinkedIn profile. If I was your chairman, I would terminate you immediately for doing that. You cannot have a CEO as half a foot out the door and be leading a team into battle. It's just not going to happen. And so it's a big red flag. And then values and philosophy. What do I mean by this? Do you believe that success is begotten by hard work, by having integrity? Do you believe that it's by cheating? Do you believe that the most successful people are born into success? Do you believe that the most successful people are strategic? Do you believe that they're operationally focused? So what really do you value, and what is your philosophy into coming into the thing? And so the final quote that I would leave you with on this slide is, you don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And I think it's really important to understand how your senior person is seeing the world. So I don't know, Pete, if this
so
makes
Shane, yeah,
sense.
let me stop you here, Shannon, because this is obviously a great point, and I do love the idea that, you know, in most cases you hire someone for what they know and you fire them for who they are, and as you go through that process. But I mean, the types of template answers that you can get, particularly around the second point and the third point, are in many ways, you know, it must be tempting for a CEO candidate to fudge the answer, right? What is your experience? In your view, how do you really get to the heart of what really motivates people in terms of the vision and what really motivates them in terms of their values, philosophies? Because anybody could spout out the, you know, wonderful textbook answers to those questions. And I know that's always one of the things that boards struggle with is, you know, an articulate CEO can absolutely say wonderful things, but in the end, when they get into the organization, it's clear that what they said in the interview isn't in their heart. So what's your reflections on that?
Yeah, this will be unearthed when you do the chronological review of the candidate's interview. So again, in the assessment, first we're going to do the chronological assessment, and then we're going to do what we're going to talk about today is your technical skills assessment. So in the chronological, I'll start asking a candidate, you know, why did you choose this university? Why did you choose out of university your first job to be in P&G? And so we start to look for consistency and the pattern of behavior that's matching and grafting onto the overarching vision the candidate has for their career. So for example, the person says, value statement, I'm a team player, I love working in teams, I love contributing to the success of others. Okay, great. Can you explain why in high school your favorite sport was long distance running? Because guess what? That's not a team sport. So we can start to see how, if the person's fudging the answers, if you go back and look at what that individual is doing in grade school, high school, in early development, you should see a very clear connection and pattern breaking out across the time. And when there's when they start to fudge the answers, there should be some breaks in those patterns that you can pick up on.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's hard to fake your history, and that's why I like Shane's approach here. So in some interviews, there's a tendency to be hypothetical or to be conceptual of, if you're in this situation, what would you do? That's actually reasonably easy for people to fudge the answer. It's much more difficult for someone to fudge the answer when talking about their own history. That's why I always like to go back to specific examples, give me specific examples or specific decisions, because, you know, those are the much more likely to be grounded in truth.
And the other thing that, just to build on what Peter's saying, that I love to do is give your candidate a ride somewhere, or at least walk them to the elevators. Because psychologically, when they're sitting in the interview room with you, they could have their guard up and try to, you know, give you the story. But once they get out of the building, you watch their shoulders drop, the tension relieves of the interview, they get into the car, and now it's like, who are you in the car with? You're in the car with your family, you're in the car with your buddy. It's a safe place. The car, it's an interesting psychological transformation when you get into a car with somebody. And at that point, they'll start just thinking that you're having casual conversation with them, because you say, oh, in high school, you said you played football. Were you the captain of the team? Or no, you know, I just never could make it. I was the water boy. Okay, fine. You know what? There's nothing wrong with being a water boy. That might mean that you're a great administrator. You're a great team organizer. You know, I've seen a lot of operations guys who, you know, were great water boys. So I want to see again that consistency, you know, and if you guys want to know more about this stuff, actually, it's based on this book here, just to give you an idea of where this book is coming from. Our book, the CEO Assessment Selection, is ranked, if you Google search CEO Assessment and Selection on Google, we actually come up as the #1 organic search result. So the other results are paid. Once you take the paid ones out, we're actually #1. And if you take the top 5 #1 spots, we occupy 3 of the top 5 #1 spots, only being contested by Harvard Business Review. So as per Google, the only other person in the world that is making content on par with us regarding CEO assessment and selection is Harvard Business Review. And, you know, they're struggling to keep the spot. So just to give you an idea where this content is coming from, and if you want to get a little bit more information about it, you can pick up a copy of the book, which is available online, or through us if you want to get free shipping. So I just wanted to touch quickly on what is the impact of a CEO who has weak financial skills. And a lot of times, because I'm dealing with the board and they're like, it's okay, Shane, because we have a really strong CFO. And it's not okay, because the incompetency of your CEO is going to cascade across the organization. Now, I don't know if Peter agrees or disagrees with that, but generally, if you look at a company that has weak marketing, it's because the CEO is weak at marketing and they underinvest in marketing, they underhire in marketing, and they don't build the competency there.
Yeah, that's completely correct. I mean, people do play to their strengths, and that means that if a CEO has come up through marketing, they're going to ask marketing related questions. If they've come up through supply chain, they're going to ask supply chain related questions. It's interesting that many organizations, they'll promote someone from marketing or brand management or supply chain, not necessarily from finance, and yet actually, the topic of talking about today is specifically financial acumen. So what we have to really dig into is how has the CEO been able to leverage the finance department? How have they been able to build their own finance capability throughout their career? And if you've got people with good evidence of that, then they're much more likely to actually meet the criteria that is really required to be a CEO, which is a very numbers heavy, a very finance heavy driven role.
So what do you guys think out there in the audience, what some of the main issues are when you have a financially illiterate CEO?
Shane, I loved the way you talked about basically how to get the candidate to talk and speak up their mind when you take them for a ride in a car or what have you. Another approach is to be a good listener. Just the other day I had a guy in my office and I sat down, we drank coffee together, and I let him just speak up, and what will happen is after a while, they'll feel very comfortable and they'll start, speaking up their mind and their own experiences. And I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, I don't know how much we'd be talking in your car though, because Nasser drives a convertible Porsche, so
oh gosh,
catching too much.
Gosh.
So number one is the inefficient use of capital. The CEO is not going to understand what their cost of capital is. They're not going to when they're allocating their excess cash across their businesses, they're not going to understand what the cost of that capital is across the different subsidiaries, and they're not going to be allocating it effectively. So that's going to be one. Linking financial decisions to strategy, that obviously will be one. Another one is you're going to run into obviously massive liquidity issues, and a lot of people are like, oh well, that's the mandate of the CFO. Well, who gets sacked? The other big thing that you want to pick up on is that they underinvest in the finance department. So they're not going to be putting the latest IT, the latest tech in. They're not going to be, they're going to tell the CFO, well, you're going to do treasury as well. And so you won't have a fully developed treasury department. You won't have a fully developed. And so a lot of the functions will be, the org structure will suffer both horizontally and vertically. This is the biggest problem, because a competent CFO is not going to stick around in a company where the capital is not being used properly, where you have liquidity challenges, and the guy's underinvesting in the finance. So right away, any good CFO is not going to join. I'm sure we have some CFOs with me. Let me just hear. We have a point here. Is going to what? He's going to sell the business. Okay, so an inability to optimize profitability. So what do I mean by this? The CEO won't understand that some of the clients that they're dealing with are not profitable. That they won't understand how to optimize the profitability of their consumer basket, for example. And they will be really focused on driving top line revenue more so than bottom line. It's just a few. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. So here, for example, let's say that we have a business group and the founder has a jewelry store as part of the business. And your financially illiterate CEO, he looks at the financial statements and he says, oh, hey, with COVID, we lost 500K last year. That's not a big deal because next year we're going to come out of this and we'll get that back. We're going to move from the red into the black. So is this correct? Is this a correct read of the statement? Obviously, you don't have the financial things, but this is a major problem because here's an example of how the cost of capital really affecting how the CEO is going to interact with the company. And in fact, the jewelry store has $5 million of capital tied up in stock and other elements, and the cost of capital is 10%. So what are we really looking at is you're actually looking at a loss of more than 6.5 million US dollars. It's a big difference. And you're not putting in the opportunity cost of where that capital can actually be deployed. And to give you guys like a really simple example, because you don't need to be you don't have to be a finance person to grab onto this stuff. I'll just give you like a really simple example. Say Nasser is a friend of mine and I have a jewelry business, and I say, Nasser, Nasser loves jewelry. He likes to have the top down in his car and no, I'm just joking. But let's say he does. So he's like, yeah, Shane, I'll invest. I have $1 million. I say, look, I need $1 million because I have to get gold and diamonds and I have to have it on the shelf. So he gives me $1 million. Says, fine. So then I'm like, oh, Nasser, sorry, like we just started. I lost 500,000, but don't worry. Next year, we're going to be great. And then Peter comes and Peter says, Nasser, I have this HR technology platform that is just being sold to all the banks. And I have, 120% growth rate. And I need $1 million in growth capital. And, I'm going to be able to give you, a massive return. In the end of 24 months, you pretty much double your money. Nasser turns around and says, sorry, I just invested in Shane's jewelry shop. And I don't have any capital to deploy in your thing. So you miss the opportunity cost of the investment. And that's what's happening with the CEOs who are financially literate. They have an inefficient deployment of their capital across the subsidiaries. They need to exit those businesses. You need to liquidate this business because the cost is much more than what the loss in net margin is. I don't know if that makes sense. For belaboring.
And on top of that, the payable and receivable as well. Here it is, I paid out $1 million, but when I'm going to be receiving portions of that $1 million to reinvest them in Peter's, maybe solution or other solutions out there. So the payable and receivable are very imperative to the business, and getting to understand how the flow of them, they're crucial to the business. Otherwise, the business will close up.
Right. And so the other key thing to pick up here is that a lot of the CEOs don't calculate the cost of capital for each individual subsidiary. They usually have a holding group and the banks provide them a cost of capital figure, decide the discount rates for them. And then they use that cost of capital across all the subsidiaries, which is not correct and leads to some of these missing issues. I'll give you another example. So when I say the CEO will not be able to optimize profitability, say you have a company that provides kitchen equipment. They are they have amazing clients. So, they provide the ovens for Cheesecake Factory. They provide the ovens for Red Lobster, McDonald's. And the CEO really likes to walk around and boast these names. And unfortunately, despite this and being a market leader, they only have a low single-digit profit margin. And why is this happening? Anybody have any idea? The answer is actually written on the slide. Anybody can pick up on that. Is that because the CEO is not financially literate, they are not asking for a very detailed report from the CFO in terms of which of our product lines is most profitable, what's the cost position on our services, which of our clients is most profitable, which of our clients has the highest cost position. And so when you do that, very quickly, you learn that one of the big restaurant chains is a very demanding client. Every time you send them oven equipment, they ask for customizations, they ask for changes, and the equipment is being shipped back and forth. And these bespoke changes are costing a huge amount of money. So and this is a real case study. So then the CEO, identifies where the profitability is going and changes the contract and says, look, we're happy to provide your kitchen equipment, but these changes are going to cost you extra. And then also starts to calculate what's the opportunity cost of having a client that the senior leadership team has to go and visit, 6 times a month. There's a massive cost as well that doesn't show up on your P&L of the opportunity cost of having, a senior team visiting a client, dealing with a client, and the client management side. Some of the clients refused, and he said, and he had the guts, which no other CEO had the guts to do, is to let go some of these landmark clients and say, you know what, by the way, XYZ restaurant chain, you might be the 3rd largest in the world, but you're no longer a client with us. Goodbye, because you're not profitable. And so the dog and pony show ended, and he delivered a 400% increase in 24 months to the bottom line. And he shrunk the top line by 15% doing this. So your CEO, these are some of the skills that you want your CEO to have. It took a lot of guts. So what are some of the quick questions that you want to ask? Does anyone have any favorite questions out there that they like to ask?
I'm going to put, pardon? I loved what you talked about. And, I'm kind of thinking right now, imagine having a CEO in the manufacturing industry where he cannot understand his total overhead expense, or the turnover that he's having, or the liquidity ratio, or the solvency ratio, or any of those things. How can he or she run their business? They will not understand how to do even the pricing mechanism for their products and services. So basically, having such things are really critical to the survival of the business itself.
Right. So my first question is actually a very simple question, but a lot of times people miss the basics, which is, identity, going back to the lodestars of our assessment program. Who are you? And, if you ask Phelps, the famous swimmer, how good you are at running on land, he'll be very comfortable to say, look, I'm not good on land. I'm not good at running, because I'm an Olympic champion swimmer. So the point is that the first question you want to ask, are you a finance person? Are you a numbers person? Very senior people who are already, CEOs in their own right will be very comfortable to tell you, like, yes, I have a skill gap here. That's why I've been working with, Samuel, my CFO, for the last 15 years. And, they're aware of their gaps. So a lot of times they'll come up front and give it to you. The second question that you just want to ask, these are very quick, these are very simple questions. Does the CFO report to you? And a lot of times they will say yes. But there's a big difference between getting a report from the CFO and receiving the report of the CFO. These are 2 different things. So a lot of times the CFO will either report into a group CFO or the chairman, and has a dotted line into the actual CEO that you're dealing with. This is especially true across the Gulf, where you're going to have country managers, and these individuals really do not have full accountability for the P&L. And so it's just a quick question. Do you have hire, fire, and development responsibility over your CFO? Did you hire your CFO? Can you fire the CFO? If you're not allowed to hire or fire your CFO, there's a good chance that you don't have the accountability for the P&L. It sits with someone else. So that's a very fast question just to rip through. Another one, this is a bit of a trick question. Does anyone know the 5 financial statements? So it's a really quick one. What are your 5 financial statements? And the reason why it's a trick question is because if you really are running a business, you're not going to use any of these statements to run your business. That's a trick question, because these are accounting statements. These are accounting standards. They're not management reports. And if somebody needs to make management decisions, they can run into trouble very quickly by running off the income statement. It's one of the big problems that happens is the CFO gets the income statement from the CFO. It looks like a great, the numbers are great. Revenue is boosted, looks fantastic. And they start making CapEx decisions based on that. And very quickly they run into a cash flow problem because, revenue is a very misleading number. And so if you want to get into this, if the person is accountable for the finance, they will be dealing with these 5 statements because you're getting your audited financials every quarter, and you're going to contest at various elements in these with your CFO. And so if you don't know what they are, it's a bit of a red flag, but it's not a major issue to stop. It is an issue if they're not using any other management reports or any other metrics. So the next question that I really want to ask is, what metrics are you using outside of revenue and profit to drive peak performance in your business? And if all they're using is revenue and profit, there's a good chance they're financially illiterate. They're not really going to have the skill set, again, to optimize the business organically. You're going to have, this is generally going to be a CEO who's a glorified sales person. And another key thing to keep in mind is that most of your CEO candidates don't get full accountability for a P&L until they get into the CEO job. So it's not necessary, unless they're a CFO who's been promoted into the CEO. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I see Peter moving around here. Are you?
No, sorry, Shane. I'm just taking a glass of water. No, but I think it is an interesting point, right? And it's a classic thing of when you are promoting someone into a CEO role, you're typically promoting them into a role that they haven't done before, unless you have a model of going and picking someone who's already been a CEO elsewhere, right? But in most cases, what you've got to try and do during the hiring process is identify, based on their previous experience, is what is the likelihood that they'll be able to step up and take that extra responsibility that, frankly, you only get when you're sitting in the corner office. And that really is the difference, right? You can be a divisional CEO, you can be a regional CEO, but until you're really sitting in the main office, you don't have that full end-to-end accountability. And certainly with CEOs that I speak to, that's certainly the biggest thing that really struck them when they first get the keys to that corner office door, is that full end-to-end accountability that only rests with a single person in the organization.
So these are quick 4 questions that just right out of the gates that you want to understand. If you get wrong answers to here, you're not going to continue. So this question, let me just give you a case study of this. I was meeting with, this is a true story. So I'm meeting with the chairman and the CEO of a car rental business. I've changed the numbers around a bit and the countries and stuff to protect the innocent or guilty, as you may judge the story. But I was very excited, to meet. Obviously, you're meeting a chairperson, you're meeting a CEO, and you want to have, a high-level discussion about business. And so I was really excited to go into this meeting. I asked them one question. So I come into the room. Chairman's there, CEO is there. Sit down. I haven't even sipped my coffee yet. I just, the coffee's on its way. And I asked him one question. Within one question, I am able to ascertain that this chairperson is not really involved in the business or effective in running the business or understands the business to a depth that they would actually be able to optimize it. And same with the CEO, that this business is not optimized 100%. What is the question I asked? Does anybody have a guess at that? What is this one question? It's already been discussed. How will you grow at what profit? That's a decent question. How will you grow at what profit? So my question was that I asked, which is the one that we just gave you the questions, guys. We just gave you the questions on the other on the other slide. And I said, look, let me give you a case study of how this question works. So the question is, what metrics do you use outside of revenue and net profit when you're looking at your business and you're looking at optimizing your business? And then the chairperson says to me, I look at revenue and net profit. So the exact question I asked was, what are the metrics you look at, to drive peak performance in your business? And then the chairperson says, I look at revenue and net profit. This is a horrible. How many people agree with me that this is a horrible answer? Or how many people think that that answer is okay? Capital needed. I do agree. Okay, great. I have some support out there. Thank you. So this is why, for those of you who aren't sure, if you're managing a rental business, you don't want to know about revenue and net profit, because that's a historic figure. After everything, all the battles are said and done, you can let the dust settle and say, oh, look, this was our net profit. Okay, congratulations. That's great. But if I'm managing that business and I really want to make sure that I optimize it, I want to know, what's my utilization rate? What's my car rental fee rate? What is the moving average of my rental fee rate week on week, month on month? So if all of a sudden I have 3 weeks in a row where the rental rates are dropping, and my utilization rate drops below 70%, these are major issues. And I'm not going to be able to double the size of my business if I don't have my main metrics are already peaking. I would have to have my utilization rate completely peaked out. I would have to have like the highest rental day rate in the industry. If I'm going to deliver the highest growth rate, I should be beating the industry. There should be a massive delta on my core business metrics that I want to see. And so very quickly you realize that the CEO is not doing it, the chairperson is not demanding it, and now we got bigger problems. Because the other thing that you also want to touch on, as people are saying, is what's the size of your market? What is the market trend? And you start to realize that these guys need to take 14% market share. That's massive. Where is it going to come? And the market's shrinking at 1.2% negative. You realize that they're totally out to lunch. They're in a la land, and they're just saying, oh, we're going to double the business, and you're not. You will fail. And the tail of the tape that happened in this situation, you guys want to know what do you think happened to these two? They're both sacked. Within 24 months, both these individuals were sacked.
Their goal is illogical, based on the market growth and for that sector. So basically, it's illogical what they're aiming for. So their goal is unachievable to start with. So it's impossible, and the numbers basically they don't make sense.
Yeah, and so just to break it down like very simply for you, if you go and you ask someone who wants to lose weight, and they say, oh yeah, I'm going to lose 12 kgs this month. And then you ask them, how many calories is in a kg of fat? How many calories do you need to make? And somebody who's very professional will tell you that 1 pound of fat has 5,000 calories. I'm going to be eating 100 grams of chicken, which will have 250 calories, and I'll be eating 100 grams of rice. So they really, again, get into the emotionality and the detail, which is really another theme that you want in any of your assessment. If you talk to there's one of the individuals, for example, companies that does juice in the Middle East. If you talk to the founder of that company, he will start to tell you how he changed the mechanics of the juicing machine to squeeze 15% more juice out of an orange, and what the mechanical changes that he made on the factory floor to do that was. And this is a chairman talking to you, and so you really want to get into those financial metrics, and you want to look at pre-success indicators. If somebody doesn't know what this is, they're not going to be in the game. The other question here, so now I've only asked 5 questions. This is my 5th question, and I will have a pretty good idea of be able to make an estimate of where you sit from a financial skill set based on this. Mirage, Mirage is it's a bit of a zinger of a comment, but I touched that one. But yeah, describe a management report dashboard you custom made with your CFO to monitor key financial metrics. If you have not made a custom made management dashboard, you are using the accounting metrics that are being provided to you by somebody that's working off an IFRS standard global template. You have failed. So you need to have your own management dashboard, and you really need to be looking a lot more detailed and specific than your competitors are if you're going to outperform them. I don't know if that makes sense. The other question that's not on here that I also ask is to describe the last time you got in a fight or you had an argument or you had a disagreement with your CFO. What was it? What was it about? That's another quick litmus test. CEOs who never get in arguments with their CFO, who never challenge their CFO, who never have a debate that, hey, you know, this depreciation rate is wrong. This is not how you should be depreciating this asset, whatever it is. That's obviously a very simple example. You're going to get more complex one. They are also most likely, you know, not that financially strong. They're not strong enough to challenge the CFO. And so they're not getting in an argument with the CFO. They're not changing the reporting of the CFO. And they have a huge amount of problems possibly on the horizon waiting for them if that is the case. So, I didn't read that last comment, but I'm going to get to these. So this is also a great question. And so, you know, you just look at, so I'll give you a live example of this one is when you're interviewing healthcare CEOs, like hospital CEOs, this is a natural thing that happens because some hospitals are run to not be profitable. They are serviced by the government, and in no way are they trying to make a net profit. So the CEOs who run those hospitals are focused on quality of patient care, and they don't really care that your dialysis department has a higher cost than your ophthalmology, or your pediatrics is 10 times more or 10 times less costly than your cardio. It doesn't matter to them. And so these guys transition from public sector into private sector, and you then start to say, well, hey, are you optimizing? Are you able to optimize the profit orientation of a hospital or not? And then you have CEOs who fall in the other bucket, who really care about quality of patient care, but they also realize in order to give the best quality patient care, they need to have a good net profit so they can buy the latest equipment and they can keep the standards up. So you just ask them, what is your cost position across each of your departments? Which of your departments is most costly? Which ones is most profitable? And which ones are losing money? And what are the metrics you look at to decide that? And you know, some hospital CEOs will really have it broken down and understand what the full suite of services are that you need. Sorry, it's a bit of a long example, but this one also will separate the amateurs from the pros, let's say. I don't know if we have any comments on those questions. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. You walk through these and we're really starting to get an idea very quickly in less than 15 minutes, you know, what kind of financial skills your CEO has. So I hope you guys are liking this so far, because, you know, this is a tactical session. You can grab these questions. You can use them right away, immediate impact. So what's your philosophy of managing cash flow? A lot of people say, Shane, why are you asking someone for their philosophy? We're not the Dalai Lama here or something else. But there's no hard and fast rule here. There's no right or wrong answer. But what I want to look at is, does the CEO understand the cash to cash cycle? So, you know, when IKEA, you know, makes a table, you know, it starts with cutting down a tree, you know, turning that into wood, you know. So what is this? Probably 3, 4, 5 months before that table, you know, the cash to cash cycle is paid. So how much cash should the CEO keep in the coffers to manage your working capital. So you first have to understand your cash to cash cycle. You have to understand your monthly cash requirement. And then you have to understand the risk appetite of your board. Going into COVID, a lot of companies had 2-3 months cash on hand, which was a bit conservative, and immediately they had to let people go. And immediately you lose talent, you lose your competitive positioning, you'll lose customers. It has a big run-on effect. Apple, on the other hand, the late Steve Jobs, he kept 12 months working capital on hand for an entire year, which is probably overkill. And the downside to that is, yes, it's less risk adverse, but you're also killing your growth capacity, because if I lock all my cash up in working capital, then I don't have cash for growth. So I can't optimize my organic growth rate. So what is your philosophy? That's why I call it a philosophy. Where does the risk appetite sit? What are the actual hardcore cash requirements? Where is your tolerance level, and where will you set it, and how will you manage that? The CEO should really, be able to talk about this, because this is what the CFO will obviously suggest and set, but the risk tolerance is really going to be managed by the board, and the CEO is going to make that final call.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point here, and I think, in my opinion, each of these questions is not necessarily a right or a wrong answer, but the way Shane frames it is good. You want to understand, what is their philosophy? You want to understand that they have a point of view, right? It's hard to have a point of view and a philosophy if you don't have that foundation of skills. So it is a strange question to ask. Tell me about your working capital philosophy, but you want to hear their answer. You want to hear what is their point of view, how they're approaching it in their current business, what's their default position, and then you also want to see evidence that they're willing to adjust their position if the business circumstances or the strategy would change.
And this second question feeds right into that philosophy question. And a lot of people actually go bankrupt because, their days payable, go over 120, they go over 180. At what point do you call the lawyer in? At what point is the hard line where they say, oh, well, you can't press charges on that client because you'll blow the relationship. Well, the other side of that coin is, do you really want relationships with clients who don't pay their invoices? And so at what point do you start playing hardball? And at what point are you saying, well, hey, I'm overreacting and I'm unnecessarily blowing a client relationship that could be profitable if I manage it in the right way? They're not paying the invoice. Why are they not paying the invoice? How do I get it done? Versus, hey, you guys are taking us for a ride. Because there's also a big thing in the region where they say, we'll drive the invoice out for 6, 7, 8 months, make sure that the supplier is starving, and then we'll renegotiate the contract and say, hey, you want this paid, I'll pay for you today, but it's 50%. So what is your CEO? Your CEO should be savvy enough to know that this is where the story is going to end up. What are your counterplays, and what red flags are you going to put in? What kind of policies are you going to have where you just tell the client, look, sorry, after 120 days, our policy is we start to file a case. It's up to you. You want to pay, you want to go to a case, I don't mind. Do you want to do that? Do you not want to do that? How are you going to manage this? How are you going to manage it? That's what I want to know. Another quick question you can just ask is, what's your interest expense? If you're not managing the P&L, you won't know the answer. So it's also like a very quick one to grab. What do you look at on your liquidity? So how are you managing your liquidity, and what's your scenario plan that, hey, if we dry up, what's our citadel going to be? Where are we going to move? What do we actually do? And what are the metrics that you look at to measure? The banks will use a quick ratio or a current ratio. And so, if the CEO has a fairly significant debt expense, they will know what these ratios are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're managing liquidity. Again, they're just basically regurgitating ratios that the bankers handed to them. This is a major issue, actually, how you manage your end of service benefit. So a lot of times the CEO is not keeping the cash for the end of service benefit in a separate account. They are basically at the end of the financial period accounting for it on the income statement by saying, less end of service benefit, and they're calculating that at 8% or 3% or whatever their attrition rate is, or whatever they feel is an acceptable tolerance for that. But this can also be a very it can be a very negative thing that happens. For example, when you saw a particular company that had a crane fall in Mecca, all of a sudden they had to lay off 30,000 people, and you need to pay this end of service benefit for 30,000 people, many of which, because you're an old company, may have been working for you for 15 or 20 years, and all of a sudden you didn't account for that cash properly, and you didn't, because you didn't have a treasurer, you didn't have a full-time treasurer, you don't have a portfolio, you don't have your own investment portfolio, and you're all of a sudden caught in a very serious situation, which can end up in many cases having you in jail. If you're a publicly listed company in the West or Canada, a lot of the companies you would be in jail if you don't manage this properly. So comments here, and the thing is that interest expense is only important when you're lingering, but this is when it gets out of control. Your CEO should know what the interest expense is and be watching it, and it should be within the tolerances of what they set as their risk appetite. Pete, this must fall right with you as an HR in terms of management of the end of service benefit. How comfortable have you been with how people are managing this? I think you were in banking, so by the central bank mandates that you have to put 8% of your salary expense into your end of service account.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I think it's a requirement. It is best practice. So certainly in banks here in the Middle East, absolutely create a separate account for it within their treasury function. But more broadly beyond end of service, which is I guess perhaps a unique thing here in the region, pension accruals across most global organizations are a pretty big deal, and there's been plenty of organizations that have been caught out under accruing. And so, I mean, frankly, as a HR manager, I typically didn't have to ask too many questions around cash accounting, but the one question that I did make sure is that all of our accruals for end of service or for pension benefits in markets where it's a pension were taken care of appropriately. And frankly, any good CFO will make sure that is done appropriately and kept separate. I mean, the temptation to dig into that money and use it to grow the business must be very strong, but it's just unethical, and we shouldn't allow people to do it.
Well, Nasser is running an SME over there. Nasser, are you properly accounting for your end of service benefit?
I'm sure he is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as you say that, it's very critical, for God's sake, if we want to do layoffs. So basically, we have some sort of cash on the side just to be on the safe side. Yeah, I mean, talk
about handing you a loaded question, huh? It just gets better and better. So you're planning to lay someone off, or what's happening over there?
No. It could be critical, as you guys stated. Just that could, kill a business if it's going to happen on a massive scale. Absolutely.
Well, the thing is Nasser, you go to jail.
It's actually a really good point.
If you don't have the end of service to pay somebody, right?
Absolutely.
But it is a good point, Shane. It's slightly off topic, but there's companies in the US now, publicly listed companies, that are not just accruing the pension benefits, but they're accruing severance costs, which are not end of service, but you only pay them if you do a termination. They're actually accruing them each year in order to give them the flexibility to do a restructure at any point. And it's actually a really, really smart idea, because I have seen situations where people are wanting to restructure the business, but they feel that they can't afford it because they'd have to pay incremental severance costs. So think about it like that. If you've got a good CFO who's helping to give you the flexibility to run the business in the most flexible way, then those kind of things should be in the consideration set.
Right, and a good CEO will take this end of service benefit and turn it into a profit center, and you have that entry revenue from investments, and what's the right mix, and then you want to talk about how the CEO manages that, and what his strategy is, how much of it should be in liquid investments, and where and how they're going to manage it. The other thing is the philosophy around debt. I know this word philosophy, business people don't like it. But what I want to understand is, where's your debt tolerance? How much debt should you be using? That's a call the CEO has to make. So some CEOs will say, hey, if the bank's going to give me $100 in debt facilities, if you don't use $100, I'll use $98. I'll use $95. Other CEOs will be like, I will not exceed 30% of our top line revenue, or we won't use more than 4 times EBITDA, or, they'll have a kind of metrics in place that they will use that they won't go above and beyond. And so people would say, if you're not using debt, you're not leveraging for growth. You're not optimizing your growth rate. Other people will say if you start using debt, it's the devil and it's the end of you. But you want to understand, where does your CEO sit, and you want to have a match between the debt philosophy and preferences of the board as well. The last question, provisioning and discounting. We won't. I think I'm running close on time here, so I want to give the audience some time for questions. But this is the basic things, is, can you manage liquidity? Do you understand the difference between revenue, cash, profits, how debt should be used, etc.? These are really the basics and the main costs that we want to look at. And this, again, is our framework. You want to start with what we're talking about today is, can the CEO interact effectively with the CFO and read the P&L? Number 2 is the next skill set we'll be looking at is, can they optimize organic growth? Number 3, which we'll be talking about next week, which will be a lot more technical, which will be, can they lead your M&A strategy? So if you guys want more, we have actually the first time ever in the region, a course by SPJ and Global School of Management. I'm one of the instructors, which is accredited CEO assessor course, which you can take over 2 days. And at the end of it, you have a university level certificate that indicates you are a CEO certified assessor. And we look at all these key pieces. And again, if you want, the book again is also available, which is a quick hit. I mean, I think it's a must-have for anybody's library if you're involved in these assessments. The other thing is, if you want more free stuff, go to the website and there's a free download for the book there. So you get a free download on using finance to drive peak performance. And there's a free download there if you want to get another taste. And on YouTube, I think Anthony's going to release, there's a little link there. So there's a little overview of the book on review of the book on YouTube as well, which you can watch. And so, as this picture indicates, you definitely don't want to be the zebra in this picture. You want to make sure that you're the lioness there. So hopefully our content will love you do that. So what questions do we have here? I think I'm slightly running over time. Sorry for that, guys. But
we're looking a little bit over time. I guess there's a few questions, Shane, about company tax liability, about making CFOs liable for financial irregularities. I know that's certainly a big trend. I guess any points from you, Shane, on those?
I think 100% the CFOs. I think 2 things need to happen though, but it's a regulatory thing as well. In that the CFO's visa should not be tied to their employment visa if you really want to enforce candor in the boardroom. So if the CEO is doing something that's irregular, the CFO has 3 kids in school, is swimming in mortgage debt, and is like, I don't have enough cash the last 2-3 months if I lose my job. And so, if he challenges or she challenges the CEO and the CEO fires them, the guy's in really hot water. So you have to make a situation where the visa is not tied to the job if you really want to have that candor from your CFO and make them fully accountable. Whereas back in US or in the UK, the CFO will say, hey, I'm out of here. You can't do this. I'm gonna burn you on the cross in front of the board in the next boardroom meeting, and I'm gonna walk out of the building across the street and go to the competitor. Well, that's more difficult to do in the UAE, where the person visa gets canceled and they may have to leave the country. So that's one issue with that. But 100%, these people need to be accountable. The other thing is that a lot of times the business groups are embarrassed by what's happened, and they don't want to file a case because they don't want to make it public. They want to keep their dirty laundry in the laundry room. And so a lot of times these guys walk, and their only real penalty is that they're not allowed, you know, they probably shouldn't come back into the country if they know what's good for them. So that's another thing to keep in mind, especially when you're doing the interview, is that a lot of times cases are not filed. And so you don't see a case and you assume that this person is okay, but it's not. It really something to look at. I don't know what you think, Pete, on that point. Or
no, I'm with you on that. It is an opaque employment market here, and also an opaque legal market. So some of the transparency elements that are existing in Europe are not quite here yet. They likely will come. And so as a result, you're making a decision, you know, with some ambiguity on all sides. And that's certainly, you know, one of the challenges, but also one of the reasons why people here in this market tend to employ people like Shane and others to help them filter out and make some of these decisions. But I know, Shane, we are right up against our 1 hour hard stop. So final comments from our main host, Mr. Shane Phillips.
I'll just say, you know, I want to thank you guys so much for coming and giving me a chance to share my passion, which is assessment, with you guys. And big thank you to Nasser Zega from Digital Analytica. Thank you so much, Nasser.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Nasser. Great
Thanks
to see
everyone
you.
for being here, by the way. It was very nice presentation.
And thanks Pete for joining in. And if anyone has any other questions, just email me, call me. I'm available on WhatsApp on that number. And you can also download some of our free assessments on the website if you want. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And also all the recordings, because people keep asking me, can you share the recording? The recordings are on the website on the video section. So you just go on the video, you go on the website, you click on resources, click on video, and there we are. So I think I'm
brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great week ahead.
Bye for now. Yeah.